crafty friends, this is card number 17 in Full Deck Challenge 3. I have my constant, which is my postage stamp. I have a few, I'm not quite sure yet which ones I'm going to use. I will see what works best at a later stage. Then my carryover item from last week is going to be numbers. I used the number 22 last week. I'm going to use numbers again for this week's card. And I have a few variations with numbers. I have a printout and some other little bits. Again, we'll see as we go how we're going to use these. I also have a number stencil, but I didn't end up using this. This week's prompt was blending, and I'm going to do my blending with some inks. I've picked a few colors that I think go together, and then I have my blending brushes. I may or may not use all these colors. I also have a piece of white tissue paper that I'm going to use on my card. This tissue paper is the type that you'd use for gift wrapping. I'm going to use the numbers on the printed sheet as part of my background. I'm just going to tear those up into smaller pieces, put them randomly down in a mini collage style way. Now, I contemplated for a while if I should put the numbers down first or the tissue paper down first. Eventually, I decided to do the tissue paper first for no specific reason. Just thought I didn't want those numbers to fade too much if I have them covered with tissue paper, and then if I'm going to also use gesso on top. Here I'm attaching the tissue paper and the numbers with some Mod Podge. I always add Mod Podge on top of my tissue paper or any kind of mini collage I've added. This is just a way to waterproof it so that if you do add any kind of wet medium on top, it doesn't make the paper fragile and then it doesn't tear and get all soggy. I've dried all my Mod Podge well, and I'm just trimming off the excess. Going in now with some white gesso. This probably wouldn't be a ShanoukiArt project if there was no gesso. Gesso is my very best friend. And I'm going to add it here just to soften those numbers and to create a good base for my blending that I'm going to do shortly. And I remembered to keep the number and the suit of the card open on the top left. Sometimes I do forget. But if you have covered everything up, it is also totally okay. I'm now going to start with my blending. I'm going to start with the vintage photo color, applying some ink to my little blending brush. I'm just going to go in little circles, just in certain parts of the card. No rhyme or reason here, just where I feel it needs the color. I do try to have different pressure with the blending brush. So I have some darker areas and then some lighter areas. Here I'm going in with the light blue, and the overall idea here is to let the colors blend into each other. You could have also chosen to do blending with paint, and I love seeing how everybody interprets the prompt. And speaking of prompts, the prompt for next week is junk. It's never too late to join in the Full Deck Challenge. This is Deck 3. I'll put a link to the playlists for the other two decks in the description box below. You can start at any time on any deck and with any card. I think I'm finished blending. One thing I love about these inks is that they react to water. I'm going to sprinkle a little bit of water over the entire card, and then I'm going to put a piece of kitchen tissue paper over the top to pick up that water. And as you can see, it lifted up the color where the water was. I love that overall effect. It creates a very interesting background. I think with the colors I've used, I'm getting a bit of a vintage feel. I do love a turquoise and a brown together, one of my favorite color combos. So I think I'm going to go more with a vintage cluster or decoration for this card. I'm going to add a couple of pieces of vintage tape. I think that tape screams vintage on any project. If you'd like to make your own, I do have a tutorial and I'll put a link in the description box below. Now I'm just steadily working on my little cluster, trying to add my postage stamp in as well, and the little numbers. So I'm just going to go back and forth and see what looks best. Sometimes this can be a quick process, sometimes it can take a long time to get something that looks right. To add a bit of contrast and to allow this cluster to pop off the page, I'm going to put a piece of white cheesecloth in the background, just behind my little cluster. The white of that will help to enhance the vintage colors and make it stand out a little bit more. It also adds some beautiful texture and more interest to the piece. Going to glue down my cheesecloth. I'm using a clear craft glue and going to stick down my elements. This number 75 is actually from a vintage bingo game. I found it quite a few years ago in an antique store. It had the board, the bingo cards, and these numbers. I think it's really cute. For some contrast and to pick up that black in the number 75, I'm going to add a small amount of black splatter in the top left corner of my card. I'll use watered down acrylic paint for my splatter. I'm going to temporarily add a large paper clip just to hold all my elements down so they can stick well. And then I'm going to dry my acrylic paint. Just want to move that cheesecloth down a bit and tuck it in behind my element. Just a small adjustment that I feel necessary. I feel it needs a little bit more black for contrast, so I'm going to come in with my script stamp and some black permanent ink and add a little bit of stamping in the top right and the bottom left corners. A few small enhancements, black fine liner pen going around that number just to make it stand out a little bit more. Another small piece of the vintage tape. And then distressing the edge of the card all the way around with some distress ink in the color Vintage Photo and my blending tool. Let me show you a close-up of the card so you can see all the beautiful details. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch. I really hope you enjoyed it and were inspired to create your own or even join in the full deck challenge if you haven't already. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the little bell so you're notified every time I upload new content. Thanks again for watching. Happy creating, and I'll see you again soon. Bye.